Hey, y'all, and welcome back to another weekly live cast where we talk about community service, politics, culture, and everything in between. I'm Christopher Van Hall, author of Reborn Again, Crucifying Christendom, and Resurrecting a Radical, pastor of Greater Purpose Community Church in Santa Cruz, California, and a co-founder of the Greater Purpose Brewing Company. And today I have a very special guest with me. I have the Reverend Dan Paul with me to talk about blue theology. Dan, how you doing today, buddy?
Doing good. Good to hear your voice, Chris.
Good to hear you too, man. I wish it could be one of our get-togethers like we used to have.
I
Soon,
know.
though. Soon. Are you fully vaccinated yet, or partially
I'm halfway
vaccinated?
there. Halfway there. Yeah.
So, what house did you end up in? You end up in Team Pfizer, Team Moderna?
I ended up in Team Pfizer.
Pfizer. I got team
first shot on Good Friday.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We got I'm Team Moderna here, so we got a podcast divided.
Okay.
Well, man, great having you. And I got some questions for you, man. It's stuff I know, but a lot of people haven't had the privilege of meeting you yet. So, Dan, tell us about yourself and tell us what you do in the Disciples, my friend.
All right. Hey, I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Whoop.
As a Lutheran, and was very active in the church there, and went to a Lutheran college, went to Capital University in Columbus, Ohio, and ended up in California. Back in the early 80s, I was a camp director for the San Francisco Bay Area Council of the Boy Scouts of America. And then my high school sweetheart, 15 years later, we reconnected, and she moved to California and got a job directing the physical therapy department at the David Grant Center at Travis Air Force Base. So I relocated down to Vacaville, California, and while I was working at the scout camp, and I was actually playing music for a living there too, I was very active in a Methodist church, and the pastor told me that there was a church looking for a youth director, and that would be a nice way to get a job quickly when I relocated, and it was the First Christian Church of Sacramento. So went to the job interview, and they asked me all kinds of questions, and then they said, "Do you have any questions for us?" And I said, "Yeah. Who's the Christian Church Disciples of Christ? I've never heard of you, you know." And fortunately, they had a couple of their elders on the search committee, and they gave this great explanation. And I'm like, well, that's good, and that's good. And it's like I really stumbled onto something great. Then two very strange things happened is they called me and said they were going to hire me, and that I would have a meeting with the pastor the following Monday. And then they called me Sunday night and said, "We don't know what to tell you, but we're going to put you on hold. We're going to hire you." But our pastor was killed in an automobile accident by a drunk driver coming out of Tahoe. And so then 2 weeks later, I was hired, and I showed up to come to church to see what their church was like. And the associate pastor said, "I'm just in no state of mind to preach. Could you do the sermon?" And I went, "No, because
Understandable.
I'm not a preacher." And she said, "Oh, just tell us who you are." So then I did do that, and I just told some stories, and I had gone to church enough. I knew what was in a sermon, and I pulled it off. And then next thing you know, I got people coming, and these are, I'm preaching in front of 200 grieving people, right? They just lost their pastor. And the next thing you know, I had people come into my office, wanting to counsel. And I finally said to the associate, I said, "Look, y'all are asking me to do things that, I'm not really trained to do." And she just lit up. She said, "Maybe you should get trained." So I went and took a class at Berkeley at the Graduate Theological Union, Pacific School of Religion, just to see if I could do graduate work. I hadn't been in school for years, over 10 years, and loved it. And then the next weird thing happened, and that is that my wife passed away. She had hepatic failure of the liver, and so I grieved, and then I got accepted to the Pacific School of Religion. And I said, well, if I'm going to be feeling like this, it might be good to be around a lot of people who are by nature empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
and it was a great way to get trained, to get intellectually curious, to deepen my spirituality, but also just to work through my grief in a
Sure.
really great
Yeah.
place. So that really was great, and was I couldn't think of a better place I could have been. And I can't find any other argument other than I was nudged into the
Mm-hmm.
ministry. I mean, if you want to talk about a calling, mine was definitely a calling. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
my decision, and
Mm-hmm.
it was just something I don't even know if I went kicking and screaming, but I definitely went because that was like the most viable option for me to spend my life at the time. And then I got called here to Pacific Grove before I finished school, and
Mm.
so I'm the 39th pastor of this church that's over 150 years old, and we're located a half a block from the Monterey Bay coast.
It's a beautiful campus. It's
It's
gorgeous.
it's small, but it's beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very much a disciples of Christ church. I mean, we are definitely that that flavor of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been here for 21 years. So so far so good.
Awesome, man.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah,
Well, speaking of calling, I tell people often that you're called when if you could do anything else, and there might be days where you wish you could do anything else, you still can't leave because you're so
right.
compelled. And it sounds like you've been compelled to do this other amazing work, which is blue theology. So how did that come about? And tell us what it is for those who don't know.
Okay. Well, let me get to how we did it. We well, just like any other disciples church, you have a board of directors, but you also have a board of elders
Mm-hmm.
who are responsible for the spiritual life of the church. And I know the deal. For a lot of churches, that just means you got some people who are going to say the prayers at the communion table every Sunday. But in other churches, the elders really do spend time really
Mm-hmm.
thinking about the quality of worship and the integrity of the spirituality of the congregation.
Mm-hmm.
And I was meeting with the elders, and this was even way before the church was talking about being missional.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, there was a brand new book that came out by our general minister and president. His name was Dick Ham,
Mm-hmm.
and he wrote a book called 2020 Vision, where he wrote where he thinks the church should be in 20 years. And he had some pretty
Mm-hmm.
lofty goals, was like establish 1,000 new congregations,
Mm-hmm.
revitalize 1,000 congregations. And as he was talking about the revitalization part, he said, we need to stop thinking of ourselves as parishes
Mm-hmm.
where we are a church that's in an area, so people in our area will come to our church.
Mm-hmm.
And then we function that way. He said, instead, we need to think ourselves as mission stations
Mm.
where our understanding of who we are is, in other words, instead of being the Christian Church of Pacific Grove, we're the Christian Church in Pacific Grove.
I like that.
And what is it about our unique congregation, location, understanding of ourselves that can be a benefit not just to the community, but also to the denomination at large? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what can we contribute to the entire, to the church?
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about that, limited resources. We're a small church. We've historically been a small church, like maybe 75 members. And it's been that way
Mm-hmm.
for 100 years. That's who we are. In fact, there's only 16 pews in the sanctuary.
Mm-hmm.
But we said we surely got an amazing location.
Mm-hmm. You do.
And at the time, I was involved with a clergy association here in Monterey County. And There was a United Church of Christ minister who lived here, who was not serving at church at the time. In fact, she was on the United Church of Christ conference staff at that time, and she was working with this notion of blue theology. And the way that she explained it was that, we're hearing a lot of churches say they want to be green. They want to be greener, in other words, be more ecologically friendly. She says, here on the coast, we need to be more blue. We need to know more about the ocean, and we need to know more about how we interact with the ocean and what our responsibilities are. And she had been doing a lot of work to try to connect churches with the marine biology community and the scientific community. And so, in fact, just a couple years after I got here, she put together an event at the Monterey Bay Aquarium where there were 150 faith leaders of all different faiths and 50 bona fide marine scientists. And we had this summit, I think it was called the Ocean Initiative, just to talk about this brand new word that none of us were very familiar with called climate change. It was like a brand new concept to us that the climate was changing and there was global warming going on. And that was really a great event. And I got to meet some scientists, and obviously it was a concern. So I brought that back to the elders, and we were talking about, what is our mission to the bigger church? And again, we have this great location. Now we have a location that's not just beautiful, but we have all these wonderful resources around us, like the aquarium and the National Marine Sanctuary, and the labs over Moss Landing and M Lab, and I said M Bay rather, and so we said, what if we became a church where people could come to learn about blue theology and to learn a Christian response to ocean stewardship?
That's my favorite question.
Yeah,
I love that question. What if?
To get the science, but then also have the heart language and to have a passion for it. And at first we were thinking about doing an elder hostel, and we were exploring that. And the infrastructure we would have needed for that was just way beyond our grasp. But like I said, I ran a Boy Scout camp for 10 years, and I've directed church camps for another 10, and I do know how to program for young people, and it's a real joy and a real passion of mine. I said, well, what if we brought youth groups here, and instead of having to build bedrooms, it's like we just let them have air mattresses on the floor, and we just built them some showers and let them use a kitchen. They could live really well here for a week, and we could run them through a program of learning serving, where they would have access to the aquarium, they would access to some of the scientists around here. We would take a day trip up to Santa Cruz and go visit the National Marine Sanctuary Exploration Center, and then do projects like beach cleanup, sand dune restoration, helping do data collection for the biologists. And so we developed that program, and now we've been running it for I think 12 years. Where we have youth groups from all over the country that will come and spend a week here and go through this week-long program of learning and serving. We're sending them back as ocean advocates and empowered to make changes in their church.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Just cultivating an environment of environmental stewardship. That's amazing. That's awesome. So, with your experience in having conversations with marine biologists and with your conversations that you've had with folks at the aquarium, and you've probably been exposed to lots of information about our oceans, what are your concerns about the current condition of our oceans right now? What are your, let's say, top 2 or 3?
Yeah. Well, you remember that movie, The Graduate? Where he's at a party and a guy just walks up to him and goes, I got one word for you: plastics. And that was like the opening line of the movie. Well, that's the opening line of this conversation. The amount of plastic that's floating around in the oceans right now is just vulgar. And you know the story of there's 5 gyres out there. So basically, in the ocean, and by the way, it's one ocean. We're always said all these different. No, it's all one big body of water. It's one ocean, and the way that the planet moves and the way that gravity works, that there's like 5 giant whirlpools out there, and in the middle of those, they call them the gyres. And out past Hawaii is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch Gyre, and a modest estimation is that floating plastic there is as big as the state of Texas, but it's probably more like twice the size of the state of Texas. That's how big it is. And I had a fellow from actually from Ohio that was visiting, and he said that he had made a trip to Japan, and on the way back, the flight attendant said, "I just want everybody to know we are now flying over the Great Pacific Garbage Patch." And the flight attendant took it upon herself to explain to everybody what that was. And then an hour later, she came walking by and said, "By the way, we're still flying over it."
Oh my God.
So that kind of puts it in perspective, how much plastic is out there. So I'm learning. I've had a little learning curve on all this, but hence the beach cleanup, so that especially our youth can do something that they can do right away. But now, I know you mentioned the movie. What was it? The
Seaspiracy.
Seaspiracy, which is very good.
Yeah.
There's another one called The Story of Plastics. That's really impressive, and it kind of puts it. The one on The Story of Plastics, the one thing that they make clear that you don't see in the Seaspiracy is it's important to remember that plastics are literally a byproduct of the oil industry, the petroleum industry. So now that the petroleum industry is obviously going to decline, because we're going to burn less fossil fuels, which is awesome. We should. But because of that, the business model then is to amp up the production of plastics, because that's going to be the lifeline. So what's really scary is that a lot of the information we're getting on what to do about it is actually financed by the petroleum and plastic industries. So this whole, the recycling things and the numbers, that was actually an invention of the industry.
Yep.
Knowing full well that most of that stuff would never be recyclable.
Yep. Yeah,
And
that's a common thing in Seaspiracy. After watching that, it kind of exposed a lot of like the dolphin safe tuna label.
oh yeah, that's
It's
the
just
other
like,
one.
It just doesn't exist. There's no
It
real
it could be
way.
bought. I mean,
Yeah,
I think that was the point of that
exactly.
movie. You can buy it. You didn't have to qualify for it.
And so when I mentioned this online about how amazing the documentary was, although I disagree with veganism being the total answer, because that's too simplistic to me.
You're right.
To be the total answer. And Dr. Burney talked about the iPad equation, which is something to factor in as well. But I think ultimately, what this documentary did was expose a lot of corruption with nonprofits
Right.
around, that were started by the fishing industry
Right.
as well. So it's interesting to see that correlation between
Right.
plastics and the recycling initiative and fishing industries and their environmental
Right.
protection initiatives that they've started that are really
And-
just,
Exactly.
nothing.
And then even the notion that all we need to do is get really, really good at beach cleanups and recycling better.
Yeah.
Because the reality is we don't know what to do with used plastic. The amount that we have no viable plan to deal with it. And
Yep.
so it's really putting a Band-Aid on a big wound.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, it doesn't mean you want to stop doing beach cleanups. I mean, you are keeping that much plastic from going into the ocean, and it doesn't mean you
Hmm.
don't want to try to recycle. But the real change is going to happen when, because they call that working from the back end. You're working
Hmm.
from plastic that's already been made, and then what to do with the stuff that's getting thrown away. The real work is going to be on the front end to do legislation and to do public pressure to quit making so much plastic
Yeah.
and finding
Stop making it.
alternatives to that. And that's going to be huge. It's going to be hard. This kills me. My hometown, Pittsburgh, just north of there and towards the center of the state, there's a plan right now to frack a huge part of the state up there
Oh no.
for oil and gas. All of it will be used to make plastic.
Oh my goodness.
And the way they spin it, I was talking to some friends of mine in Pittsburgh. They said, "Yeah, but they're telling us it's all going to be used for high grade medical plastic." And I'm
Oh yeah.
like, "No, it's not." But even
Oh
even
my
if it is,
god.
so what? I mean,
Yeah.
the point is, how do we stop doing that? So recently, I mean, this has been like a epiphany for me personally to look at that, and again, trying to get information about this. We have partnered with Creation Justice Ministries,
Mm.
who are really worth checking out. They're financed by the National Council of Churches, and they're the ones that do a lot of legwork to get policies in place dealing with the environment. And they have a lot of interest in ocean stewardship and ocean awareness. And so they're loving what we're doing. We love what they can do.
Sure.
And a couple of their folks have joined us last year, since we couldn't meet in person
Mm-hmm.
because of COVID. We did an online event for Blue Theology, and they came in and they worked with the youth on how to write an effective letter to your congressperson, to your senator, to your city council.
That's awesome.
And it was like I learned a lot. I mean, there were things I'd never thought about
Mm-hmm.
writing, how to write a really good letter that's going to be read and you know used. So I think that's a cool thing, and again, something that young people can do, and I think it may be just as important as going out and doing beach cleanups.
Yeah. No, but I
Yeah,
love what you said about really just tackling the issue at the source. I mean, really, the problem is that we're making these products in the first place. And how do we create sustainable and truly biodegradable? I mean, everything's biodegradable if given enough time, but within a reasonable amount of time, something that's truly environmentally safe and biodegradable. One of the shocking statistics, and I don't know how factual this is, I'm still doing some research on this, but the shocking statistic in Seaspiracy that stood out to me is that I want to say it was like 85% of plastics in the ocean are discarded fishing gear. And that was mind blowing to me.
yeah,
I mean, yes, is it great that we stopped having plastic drinking straws in California? Awesome. But when they broke down the equation of, how much pollution that actually causes
yeah.
versus discarded nets,
Right,
it was unreal.
right.
So I'm doing some more research on that documentary, and I'm interested to see where that leads me. Although I will say this, all the pushback that I have seen about the documentary, with the exception of a few activists that are saying veganism is not the answer, which I agree with, the main pushback is from the environmental organizations that the documentary exposes. It's amazing how much people have bought into that narrative. They're like, "Oh, look, scientists are saying that this documentary was bogus." It's like, of course they're saying that. They're the ones that they talked about in the documentary. So it doesn't surprise me at all.
Right.
So,
So let me tell you, and I just want to wrap into something else. Is what I liked about that movie is how it ended with at least a message of hope.
yeah.
And again, that is why I think the Monterey Bay is the most amazing place to have the Blue Theology Mission Station because we are a bona fide national marine sanctuary where
Yep.
we have very tight restrictions. First off, you can't drill there. You cannot
Yep.
drill in a national marine sanctuary. That's huge. But the other thing is that there's, all the fisheries are managed. I mean, and again, all the fishing companies here can still make a living and do what they need to do, but the ecosystems are managed. And, it wasn't that long ago. Well, here's the other, since you're all in Santa Cruz anyway, take a walk over to the National Marine Sanctuary Exploration Center. It's free.
Oh, love that place.
And every
Love
day
it.
they show a film that was made by Bob Talbot called One Breath.
I've seen it.
And it tells the
Great.
story of the Monterey Bay. And, there was we thought that the otters were extinct.
Yep.
And the elephant seals and the whales were, just disappearing. And by creating a national marine sanctuary and putting those species on endangered species, they've made a comeback. And then I just saw like 2 days ago on NPR that they're just realizing how important the otters are for the protection of the kelp.
Yep.
Because the otters feed on the sea urchins that eat the kelp. And so you got to keep the sea urchin population in check. So, but Monterey Bay is, I think, our story, especially the sardines. We used to feed the world sardines and then we overfished them.
Yep.
So how our story is, we realized what we did, we repented, and we've been blessed.
That's amazing.
Things that we've had resurrection here in our bay. And that, I think, is just the start, because now obviously we need to take what we are learning, because we're not, we're going to continue to learn how to manage ecosystems. Again, when we talk about the ocean, it's one big ocean, but it's a lot of different ecosystems. So
Yep.
everyone has to be studied. There's different ways that we need to tweak our impact on that particular part of the ocean. And, but obviously, number one is to educate other parts of the world, especially, Japan. That's what they focused on in that movie. But also,
The whaling industry.
and the third world countries. And, the interesting thing is, that's going to need to be financed too. And so there's a big hill there, but I think there's hope. And again, if nothing else, the Monterey Bay can be a beacon of what could be. If we look at that. I had a colleague here, an Episcopal priest, who said, that plastic floating out there and the poaching that goes on out there on the ocean, he said, that is just our sin on display. That is our sin on display.
Amen.
And I said, hey, there you go. And then I'll use those. I mean, it's not by accident they refer to this as a sanctuary. That's one of our words. We know what that means. It's a safe place. It's but again, it's our sins on display. But if we repent, there can be an everlasting life. There can be a resurrection happening in the
Amen.
In the ocean. So
That'll preach.
You think?
That'll preach. I think so. And Dan, I've got 10 seconds before my camera stops.
Uh-oh.
So we're going to continue this conversation soon. Y'all,
Okay.
Thanks, Dan, for coming out. Love y'all.
I love you too, brother. All right. God bless.
Well, y'all, that was an awesome interview with Dan. We got cut a little short because of the time restrictions on my camera here, but y'all, that was awesome. Remember, no justice, no peace. I'll see you next week. Love y'all. And now, may the revolution of Jesus go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you in healing this wasteland and protect you through the storm. May it lead you through this world seeking the justice it demands for you and for others. And may it bring you home preparing to continue love's mission beyond your doors. Grace
and justice to you.